Welcome to the Mindful Runner podcast. So there's a number you've seen on your watch recently, probably power. For many years, runners have trained with pace or heart rate, but now power is starting to show up on more and more devices. And the big question for many of us is, what do we do with it? Is it even useful? To help answer that question, I'm joined by coach Steve Bateman. And Steve is one of the leading voices globally on how to actually use running power in training and racing. And by the end of this episode, you'll know why power meters matter and how to start applying those to your own running. Steve, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Fred. Happy to be here.
Steve, most runners are used to using pace, heart rate, even RPE. So why should they be paying attention to power?
So you mentioned RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion or perceived effort. What power does is it puts a number on that rate of effort. So it doesn't make it perceived anymore. It makes it something that you can look at, begin to understand, take action on, and most importantly, something that you can use during your run and after your run to calculate metrics.
We'll get into those metrics in a little while. You know, if you've been ignoring that power field on your watch, it's time to start paying attention. It could end up changing your run. But let's get practical now. So Steve, if a runner wants to start training with power, what setup do you actually need in terms of apps and watches, and what's the basic setup that's going to get me running with power?
It really depends on how easy you want to make it for yourself and what your budget is. As a minimum, you're going to need a power meter. The Stryd FootPod is a power meter. It's probably the most well-known power meter right now, and it's been around the longest. But some of the higher-end watches, some of the more recent running watches, have started to build power into the watches so that there's a power meter inside your watch. As well as a power meter, you're going to need something to display it as you run. The watches that have got power meter inside will do that for you. If you've got a Stryd FootPod, there's a couple of apps or data fields that you can install on your watch. And then you're going to need some apps that act to help you plan your run and to help you review the results and calculate those metrics that we mentioned earlier.
Okay. So you don't need to be a data geek, but you do need to have a decent setup and a willingness to take a look at some additional software, right?
Absolutely. Yes, definitely.
So I've seen plenty of runners held back by bad habits with pace and heart rate. You know, you get settled into this. I see it so often when we're coaching runners who will come to us and go, you know, I'm training for a marathon, and you have a look at their data and they've been running at the same pace or the same heart rate, whether they're racing or they're doing an easy run or they're doing a tempo run, it's the same pace range, right? So that you develop these bad habits. Power can help us break out of those bad patterns, right?
It can, yeah. So one of the foundations, I guess, on which you can base your running when you're running with power is you can calculate something called a threshold power. And that's the power or the effort level that you can maintain for a reasonable amount of time. So say 50 minutes plus or minus 20 minutes. When you start going above that effort level, you start to fatigue much more quickly and you've got to slow down or stop eventually. That threshold power can be used to set your workout targets. So you can run some intervals that are above threshold, just a little bit above, a long way above, or you can run easy runs or long runs that are 80% of that threshold or so. So you can actually get very specific about the targets that you use based on your threshold power.
That takes a whole lot of the guesswork out, right? So now I've actually got a real number against which to judge whether I am running in that zone 2 or aerobic space, or whether I'm working hard or hard enough.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing I should mention is that if you're using heart rate has some lags. Towards the end of a long run, it can drift. And it's very difficult to make sure that you're staying in the correct zone for the training that you're undertaking with that workout. Similarly with pace, if you're running anywhere apart from a flat track, then the uphills, the downhills, those will all mean that you've got to vary your pace so that it's not very easy, is what I'm trying to say, to maintain the targets that you've set yourself.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, the area that I live in is fairly hilly. It's not mountainous, but it's hilly. And it's hilly enough that my pace can vary by as much as a minute per kilometer, whether I'm going uphill or downhill. And power levels that out, doesn't it? It gives me a better picture.
It you say levels it out. I want to be clear. It doesn't mean that if you're running uphill or downhill, you're going to see the same numbers. What power does is it shows you that when you're running uphill, you're running at a higher effort level, a higher power number. And therefore you can back off a little bit to stay in the target range that you've set yourself. Similarly, when you're going downhill, power will give you lower numbers because you're not putting as much effort into running that downhill. So you can speed up a bit or put a bit more effort into it if you're able. So power lets you kind of maintain the power number, maintain the effort level, regardless of the conditions or the terrain that you're running over.
And that's a good thing. Yeah. One thing I love about power personally is that the instant feedback. And in your recent book, you've got a number of good tips on how runners can use your power mid-run to adjust form, to adjust effort. Do you want to tell us about some of those?
Yeah. So, in fact, you helped with the book and we designed in, I think it was eventually something like 14 different activities. At least 4 or 5 of those were to go out for a run, notice what your power is telling you, compare it to your pace, look what happens when you go uphill, downhill, and so on, so that you can actually experience how power changes as you run over different terrains. There's no delay in the power number changing. So if you come to a hill and you start going uphill, your power will immediately go up, which is not the case, for example, if you're using heart rate. Heart rate, it tends to be that if you increase your effort, you've got to wait 3, 4, 5, 10 seconds to see the effect on your heart rate, which makes it quite difficult when you're running intervals.
Yeah, it certainly does. And one of the things I've seen, for instance, as an example, if you see your power spiking, you're trying to, if you're looking at your form, what you're looking to do is prevent the spikes. And power demonstrates those form spikes. Maybe you shift your hips and you notice a spike in your power, or you're running and your power is spiking up and down. That's generally an indication that your form is not uniform, that you're not running smoothly.
Which actually makes me think about something that longer term power is really great for, and that is for developing your sense of feel. How do things feel from an effort perspective when you're running? When are you putting too much effort in, and when are you not putting enough effort in? Power can help you, if you like, tune in that sense of feel.
Yeah, and that's certainly something I've seen with my runners, those who take to running with power. Not everybody takes to it, but those who have, you definitely see a difference in running form, but that's reflected more in their running economy, in how long it's taking them to run the same sections at similar kinds of power, but they're running them quicker because they're starting to tidy up their shape. And none is more obvious than I had one guy on a trail, a very technical hilly trail section. And this guy has run that same trail thousands of times. We started to train with power, and he found a lot of difficulty in getting his numbers right on the ups, and especially on the technical sections. But he just persevered. He kept at it. And in the space of around about 9 months of consistently, probably he ran that same trail every weekend. So, 9 months, 36 times he ran on that section. He brought his time down, his overall running time on that exact same 10K by around about 45 seconds a kilometer, which is significant, and that was just focusing on power. But it brings us to my next point now. How do we adapt when we're going uphill or downhill? How does power help us do that?
So I think we talked a bit earlier about how the power changes as you start to run uphill, start to run downhill, and so on. And that feedback is immediate, which means that you can, as you've said, try to maintain a particular power number, and you can see immediately if you're going up, if you're going over, if you're going under. It's kind of independent, if you like, of the terrain that you're running over. So I think I talked earlier about pace. If you've got pace targets, it's quite difficult to maintain pace going uphill. You're going to expend a lot more effort. Equally, going downhill, you're going to spend a lot less effort. Power helps you kind of tune in to the appropriate effort level for the terrain that you're running over.
Yeah.
Is that what you were getting at, Fred?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also, it's really challenging on very technical seat terrain to try and maintain a power number. I think it's probably unrealistic mostly, but certainly anything up to 12% up or down, you can get close to keeping a fairly constant power range on trail, that is. And the more technical a section gets, the more it challenges your skill level. And I think that's true even when you're running on paved roads. Running downhill, you're going to find that it becomes initially, for a lot of people, it's very challenging to maintain power on the down, even as little as a 4% slope. But as you start to pay attention to it, so you get better at running downhill, and that improves your overall time.
Yeah, I mean, initially it feels like you're getting a little bit out of control because you're trying to maintain that same effort level, but you're using a lot less effort for the speed that you're going at. So you're going a lot faster than you used to.
An area that I find is very useful for as well is races. Specifically for me, race starts, because I say for me because we coach a lot of ultra runners, and a great way to keep people contained at the start of a race when the adrenaline's pumping, you've turned up at an A event, your adrenaline's pumping, you are properly tapered, and you're just raring to go. If you were to run on RPE, your heart rate's cranking through the roof, but it feels like you're at a 5 out of 10. For trail races, you're starting up a steep hill. So heart rate doesn't work because it's way too high, and you expect it to be that because of adrenaline. Pace is impossible to run up a steep hill on trail. You have no idea what that is. And that's where power is a real good guide for just keeping runners back from overspending their effort, really, at the beginning on a trail race. How do we use power for trail, not just for trail racing, for racing in general?
So you were telling your story about runners that start off with an uphill. I once ran a marathon, and looking at my results afterwards, I set a personal record in the first 5K. I set a personal record in the first 10K. And after about 5K, that was it. I was spent. I had to walk most of the remainder of the marathon. But in terms of setting race day targets, there are a couple of calculators, one that's in the Stryd ecosystem and one that we've developed independently of the Stryd ecosystem, so it can be used with any power meter, any watch, that look at your threshold power, which we talked about earlier, that take into account your fatigue resistance, which has come from your completed workouts, and that factor in how well you can convert your effort into forward motion, called running effectiveness. And those calculators can give you a few different scenarios. So they can say if you run at this power level, then you're going to be able to maintain it for the duration of the event. But what it also means then is you'll get an estimated finish time. So you can see within 2-3 minutes of the eventual finish time what your finish time is likely to be. And that's one of the things that a lot of runners new to power have trouble getting used to. They're so used to aiming for a goal time that if you tell them to set out and run at a particular effort level the whole way and the finish time will take care of itself, they're very uncomfortable. So with these calculators, you can actually calculate the power to run at for the duration of the event and get an estimate of what your likely finish time is going to be based on your completed training.
Okay, that calculator is super important because you've mentioned critical power a couple of times, and without knowing that critical power number, power is just an arbitrary number on your watch. As you said earlier, we need to anchor our training on what that critical power is whenever I assume we test as we would for any other threshold number.
Yeah, we're almost coming on to what are some of the difficulties or some of the mistakes that people make when they first start running with power. One of the real difficult things to get used to is that every 4 to 6 weeks, you should be running some maximum effort runs. So a maximum effort over 3 minutes, it's the maximum effort that you can sustain over those 3 minutes. Another one over 12 minutes, and you can combine those two results to figure out a critical power. And if you don't put those maximum efforts in, then your critical power, your threshold power is not going to be accurate. Your training targets will be off, and eventually you won't be able to use that critical power effectively in planning your race power, your target power for your race. But getting used to those maximum effort runs, I'll tell you, the first few times you try them, they are very, very difficult.
Yeah. And they sound so innocent, right? 3 minutes, 12 minutes. It doesn't sound particularly long, but they're hard.
I mean, 3 minutes, even for an average runner, is something like 500 or 600 meters. For a a kind of middle of the road runner, it's just over 800 meters. It may be as much as 12 or 1300 meters for an elite runner. So that's quite a long distance to maintain a maximum effort for.
So where are we going to find those calculators? As you said, there's one built into Stryd, but you need to be a Stryd subscriber. You've got a calculator that requires no subscription, right?
Correct. So it's called Superpower Calculator. In fact, there's a website called superpowercalculator.com that has a number of the basic calculations on. And if you want to get a bit more advanced, and if you want to, in particular, calculate a race day power, then there is a Google Sheets version that you can download for free.
And I'll put the link to the website and into the show notes as well, so anybody can link through to that. Okay, that's great. So now we know how to get our critical power. We can then set our training targets accordingly. We've spoken about the big mistakes you see. Where do you see? So cycling power it's everything from a cycling point of view, right? Absolutely every cyclist out there who's serious about their racing is going to have a power meter. Is running going in the same direction?
I'd love to say yes, and we appear to be heading in that direction, because if you look on Facebook at the number of subscribers or the number of members in the Stryd Facebook group, it's growing month on month. So more and more runners are actually buying a Stryd and trying out power. If you talk to a coach like Steve Palladino, who's probably the foremost expert on power globally right now, he was involved in cycling power as well as now in running power. His view is it took something like 15 to 20 years for cycling power to become pervasive. And really that reflects that a lot of cyclists that were starting out were looking for different ways to get into being able to maintain the distance, maintain the effort level. They found power, they started trying it. And as they progressed up into the top ranks, so they took that power paradigm with them. We are starting to see some top level runners start to use power now. There are at least 2 or 3 that I've seen posts about, again, on Facebook. So it does appear that running is going the same way, that running power will eventually become something that you will need to use to be able to be a top level competitor. I say that with reservations. I don't know if that's going to be true for track events. For track events where you're running on a flat surface, pace is probably just as good as power. But outside of track events, so marathons and triathlons and so on, I'm pretty sure we're going to go the same way as cycling has gone.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. It has a lot of uses, and the more I find it extremely easy to use power, because you're looking at one number and you can really just dial in your running effort and just try and hold that number. It's a whole lot simpler than paying attention to the other heart rate, pace.
So, Fred, you mentioned about dialing into one number, and I don't know how much time we've got left, but I think we've got plenty of time. Okay. One of the mistakes that I do see in runners new to power is expecting that power is the only thing that they need to take note of. And they try to run to the numbers and they try to meet every number. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes they're having an off day and maybe the number's been set too high. Maybe they're fatigued from something that's happened in the last day or two, and they're not able to meet the numbers. And so they try extra hard to actually get up to the target level and do the workout. Power isn't a magic bullet. It's not something that will tell you how hard you have to run for the particular run, no matter how good your targets. And there is still obviously a lot of judgment that you need to know whether you're having a good day, an off day, whether to run to the target or not. So one of the mistakes that new runners tend to make, new runners to power, is simply following the numbers as if they are a Bible. They're not.
Okay. Yeah. I think I saw a good explanation. You need to see heart rate and pace in your side mirrors in order to get a fuller picture of exactly what's happening. I tend to look at heart rate after a run to get a sense of, just a more complete picture. And there are many other numbers on the watches, which are your stress levels, all of those things impact. But it's certainly a good guide to keep you honest. And that's another good thing. Rather than settling into this standard pace, no matter what you're doing, you now have a number on your watch that'll keep you honest when you should be doing a VO2 max interval stick to the numbers, and you're going to get the right results. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want the right results. It's not just running.
I should maybe offer a flip side to the point I just made, which was don't stick to the numbers. I think it's far easier to use power numbers as targets than it is to use pace. I've seen lots of running plans that say run some intervals at 10 seconds lower or slower than your 10K pace. And for a new runner, that's a really difficult thing to do because I don't know my 10K pace necessarily.
Exactly.
I certainly don't know what 10 seconds slower feels like. And is that 10 seconds slower something that applies to elite runners, to runners that are faster than me or runners that are slower than me? Because 10 seconds seems like an arbitrary number. With power targets, you do get much clearer guidance for a new runner to say, stay within these two numbers. So the lower end of the range, the higher end of the range. And that I think is much simpler.
Yeah. And that's a good point. This is a bit of nuance though. Stay in the middle of the numbers, not at the top of the range.
Mm-hmm.
As with any range, when we're training people, stay in the middle of the band, not the top of the band or the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think bottom line here is if your watch has got power, start using it. Experiment. Begin simple. Find out what your threshold is. Jump onto Steve's website. Find out what your threshold is, and start playing around with power and seeing what it can do for you. I think you'd be quite surprised. Steve, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. I really appreciate it. I'm hoping we see lots of people experimenting. I will put a link to Steve's 3 books in the show notes as well. If you want to get an idea, a good insight into how to use power effectively, I think Steve's written enough books for people to get a clear picture of what to do and how to do it.
Okay. Much for having me, Fred.